Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches English Language. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Cambridge iGCSE Paper 1, and we're going to focus on question 3, but specifically the different text types that might come up. So I'm just going to take you through what the kind of more popular ones are and some kind of key information about conventions like form and layout and levels of formality. So hopefully it will just give you a bit of a confidence boost before your exam. Let's get started. Okay, so just a reminder of the format of the question. So you'll be given an instruction to reread the text, obviously text C, so you've already read it once, you've already done your question 2, so it should be quite familiar. And then it tells you who you are, okay, and it gives you some context to the task. So in this case, it talks, so several months after completing your journey, you have written a book about the experience. You are interviewed for a television show to promote your book. So that's giving us the context, and immediately it reminds us of the genre, the audience, and the purpose. And that is going to help us decide how we're going to write this information, okay? So we know that the genre is an interview. Don't skim read this question, because if you skim read the question, you might just go, oh, I've written a book. No. You're on this interview because you've written a book, but you're actually writing the interview itself. So who is the audience? Well, it's obviously going to be, you've got the interviewer, but actually it's the wider audience being broadcasted to at home, okay? And the purpose is, of course, to promote your book, but the exam board is telling you what questions are going to be asked. And so that's going to shape the way that you do it. And obviously you're going to make the information sound as exciting as you can, because ultimately you're trying to promote a book. So you're not going to tell boring stories about your experiences, okay? So there is our little bit on genre, audience, purpose. The exam always gives you the 3 bullet points. It's going to help shape your work and tell you what information you need to retrieve from text C. Super important. You use your own words. Don't lift bits of the text. You've got to reword it to get those points. And as always, 15 marks are available for the content. So that's 15 marks basically for your reading skills, but there's 10 marks available for the quality. So that's your writing skills and the way that you present it. So I'm going to take you through some possible text types that you could get in this exam. I mean, it's not exhaustive, but it's a good guide. So the first one, as you've just seen before, is an interview. You might get a letter. That could be a formal letter, like write a letter to the local government, or it could be an informal letter, write a letter to your parents, okay? And that will determine how you write it. You might get a speech. An article, that could be like an article for a magazine, that might be an article for a newspaper, that might be a news report, and they differ slightly. Diary or journal, and then the one that everyone's slightly frightened of, the report. Not a news report, a report like of an investigation. I'm going to take you through each one. So, interview. Now, normally when you get an interview as a task, they tell you what questions to ask, just like the one we looked at before. So for the love of God, use them. Don't start going, oh, I'm going to tweak that question to make it what I want. No. If they give you a question, that's what you put down, okay? So use the bullet points to frame the interview questions. Obviously, you're going to be writing in first, it's going to be first person response, because you're going to be recalling your own experiences. Largely, you'll be in past tense when you're talking about what happened, but you may use present tense and times, particularly if you're recalling or if you're talking about a feeling that you're having in that moment. But largely, you're going to be in past tense. Now, formality totally depends on the setting, okay? So if the interview is really formal, like you're being interviewed by a politician or something, then you're going to think about your Lexis. If you're being interviewed by one of your peer group, you know, by someone your age, it might depend. But largely, I would say you want to have a kind of semi-formal, like you're not going to be using slang, but you're going to want to sound friendly and approachable. So polite, formal. Facts, opinions, feelings, intentions. That's what you're going to expect in an interview. Obviously, you're being guided by the information in text C. Never forget that. That's where 15 marks comes from. In terms of how it's set out, it should look like a play script. So you'd have the name of the interviewer in the margin with a colon, their question, then the name of the person responding, colon, and then their response. If you don't know the name of the, just write interviewer or reporter, that's fine, but that's how it should look. And what should happen is it should be set out like the interviewer asks one question and then it should be a developed response. Okay, so it's like, think about like the fact that you're planning the response that would be said. So you're going to write full paragraphs, full sentences, focusing on the topic of the question. Don't deviate because there won't be marks in it. Okay, letter. Right, I'll talk you through this in a second, but let's just quickly go through what we're going to expect. So the first thing you've got to do is you've got to assess how formal this letter needs to be. Like I said before, if you're writing to your mum, it's going to be very different if you're writing to the head teacher. Now, you've got the option of using the conventional layout, which is what you've got here, which basically your address is in the top right hand corner. The person you're writing to, their address is on the left hand side, but slightly further down the page. You've got your date here, a salutation, the main body, the sign off, and then your name. Now, you can do it this way to show that you know how to write a formal letter, but are there going to be masses of marks in it? Possibly not, so don't worry too much, but certainly at least make sure that you're using a proper salutation, greeting, you know, like dear sir, or whatever it might be. Which is what I've said now. So obviously if it's to your mum or your friend, dear mum, dear Auntie Sue, dear Chris, whatever. If it's formal and you know the person's name, dear Miss Adams. If you don't know the person's name, this is a good one, to whom it may concern. Okay, so if you're writing to a nameless person in the government, to whom it may concern. Okay, and then likewise, you need to use an appropriate sign off. So if it's an informal letter, if it's to mum, then you might say like, lots of love, Marianne, yeah, because it's informal. If you have written dear and someone's name and it's formal, then you're going to use yours sincerely. If you have written to whom it may concern, i.e. you don't know the person's name, you're going to write yours faithfully. Okay, weird little rules, but there they are. Right, opening paragraph should set out the purpose of the letter, particularly informal. You know, I'm writing to inform you of my horror at discovering the recent legislations made for blah, blah, blah. If it's informal, if it's to mum, then there may be more kind of what we call phatic talk. Hey mum, how's it going? How's dad's leg? But essentially you're going to informally get into the purpose. If you want to see an example of that, have a look at my other video on question 3, where I use the March 2020 paper, Adam K, This Is Going to Hurt, and he writes a letter. You're asked to write a letter to his mum explaining why you quit medicine. Have a little look at that. So if it's informal, you can expect to see contractions. So rather than do not, you'd write don't with an apostrophe, and kind of colloquial expressions. So informal expressions, still no slang. Yeah. Don't be writing in text speak. It's still an exam, you know, but you can get away with being a little bit more informal in tone. If it's a formal letter, the opposite, impersonal, but polite. Don't use contractions, don't use colloquialisms. So do not as opposed to don't, would not as opposed to wouldn't. Okay. Speech. Lovely. Or to get a speech, again, be mindful of level of formality. Who are you speaking to? Is it your peers? Is it fellow year 11s? Or is it the government? Okay. So depending on who you're talking to, you're going to amend your levels of formality. Quite often, a speech is to inform and normally to persuade. Regardless, it is your duty to be compelling, yeah? You want to engage your audience, you want them to listen to what you have to say, okay? So there are plenty of devices that you can use. The first thing that you are obviously going to do is use a powerful opening. You want to hook your audience straight away. Of course, you can welcome. You know, you can say welcome, you can say thank you for being here, but essentially you need to pack a punch in that opening. All the way through, you're going to need to use discourse markers to structure your speech. So your firstly, secondly, thirdly, if you are introducing opposing ideas, opposing arguments, and obviously you're going to use connectives like on the other hand in contrast. Okay, but do make sure that you structure your speech using discourse markers. And we want a powerful conclusion, yeah? So leave your audience with a lasting impression, especially if you're writing to persuade. You're going to want to use a range of rhetorical devices to engage and interest your audience. Certainly if it's writing to persuade, but like I said, if you're trying to be compelling, you're going to use these ideas. So emotive language, alliteration, rhetorical questions, facts and stats, onomatopoeia and other kind of sound devices, repetition. You see where I'm going. If you want a little bit more focus on how to use persuasive devices, I have another video that is called How to Write a Compelling Argument, and it is for any English language GCSE examination. So have a little look at that. But certainly you're going to use fact stats, maybe anecdotal information, maybe bring an expert opinion. But again, if you're looking at this video for the reading paper 1 as opposed to the directed writing in paper 2, be guided by the information that they're asking you to use. Article, news report. Okay. Right, regardless of whether it's magazine, newspaper, article, or newspaper report, use a headline that introduces the topic of the article and make sure your headline is short and catchy. Okay, so show the examiner straight off that you know how to write a news report. You might want to have a byline or a tagline, something that develops it or introduces you as the writer. Marianne Adams explores the issues surrounding plastics, for example. Now, if it is a report, a news report, then the idea behind it is very much about being informative. Like it will be telling you about something specific that happened, in which case you're going to need to use the 5 W's in your opening paragraph, you know, the who, what, where, when, why. Then you're going to move on and give a little bit more detail of like the background of the incident, why it happened, etc. You might include responses from others, like people that have been kind of interviewed. That might be done through direct quotations or through reported speech. You're going to be quite detached and impersonal. Your paragraphs are going to be quite short. Okay, so it's a news report is sort of less flowery. It's much more factual and detached. A magazine article or a newspaper article, although it may do some of these things, i.e. including 5 W's, etc., you might be a little bit more informal. You might include a little bit more sort of rhetorical devices, more sort of zippy figurative language, okay? And you might have more of a sense of an argument. So you'll include the views and perspectives of others. A magazine article may have more of an agenda, you know, than a news or a report. A report will be saying this happened, whereas a magazine article might be saying, how, you know, let's think about how we feel about this happening, if that makes sense. Diary, journal, easy. Oh, it would be lovely if a diary or a journal came up, but do just make sure that you understand the difference between the two, which I'll talk to you about. Either way, you can be in first person, yeah, because you're going to be recording thoughts and feelings and experiences. You're going to be using past tense largely, although in a diary or a journal, you might also use present tense to record the feelings that you have in that very moment as you're writing it. So could be a bit of a blend, but largely you're going to be in past tense. Largely chronologically, but you might, do you know what I mean? Because especially with a diary, like imagine if you were writing a diary at home, you'd be like, oh, this happened. And then it might make you think of something that happened ages ago. Oh, this is just like what happened when X, Y, and Z. But largely, yeah, it'll be chronological. Now, journals and diaries are slightly different. So diaries are entirely personal. They tend to start with Dear Diary, and they almost write the diary as if the diary is the audience itself. Sometimes you almost get like a little dialogue weirdly between you and your diary. You know, you might almost use second person, like, you know what I mean, diary. But a diary is entirely for the person writing it. Whereas a journal might have a wider intended audience. Okay, i.e. someone might be writing a journal knowing that it will get published. If, for example, you were doing a journey across the Antarctic and you were writing a journal of that, you would be thinking people are going to read this later on. Therefore, that's going to have an impact on your formality. It will be more formal potentially than a diary. Okay, and for that reason, your journals may well be date stamped more kind of regularly than a diary. So a diary might just be like, dear diary, today I did this X, Y, and Z, but you wouldn't necessarily be like 7:02. Whereas a journal, if you were marking out the different stages of a particular experience, yeah, you might Saturday 4 p.m, Saturday 7 p.m. You might put the area that you're in. Okay, so there's just a little bit of a distinction between them. And lastly, reports, which is everyone's dreaded one, but actually I think they're quite easy once you get the hang of it. So a report, not a news report, like a formal report, is there to inform a person, normally someone who is like an authority figure or someone in charge of something, the findings of an investigation or an incident or an experiment or a survey. You know, it's you're reporting back what has been found. And for that reason, it's going to be very, very factual. It's going to be from a distant perspective, and you're going to be very precise with your details. Observations took place between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. on the ward. You know, much, much more kind of precise. You're not going to use any figurative language. So if you struggle with like, oh God, I've got to find a metaphor. Well, a report is for you, because all we need to see are the bare facts. What happened, when, and why. No metaphors, no similes, no catchy alliteration. You can use your subheadings to organize information, and often the examiner in the bullet point will actually, the 3 bullet points will kind of give you the material you need for your subheadings. You're obviously going to be very, very formal. Now, the structure, depending on the task, it might be chronological. So, for example, if you are reporting on an investigation, it will be this happened, then this happened, then this happened, in order of the events. But if, for example, you were reporting on, I'm going to give an example from the course book. If you were reporting on people who have applied for a job, then you're going to be like, one subheading will be on one candidate, another subheading will be for another candidate. So again, be led by the exam board and what they want from you. Now, you might include quotations from participants or surveys. So let's say, for example, that doctor's one, had it been a report, you might have said 22% of junior doctors surveyed reported that. Participant A in a face-to-face panel interview suggested that, you know. So, but normally if you're reporting on what someone has said, you'd normally do it like anonymously. So you'd say like patient A or Dr. A or participant A, something like that. Okay, right, that's it-ish. Top tips. Always assess the gap before you start planning. Gap being genre, audience, and purpose. Super important, okay? Because it's going to tell you how to write it, okay? Do use conventions of the form just as I've gone through, but don't waste time. Remember that 15 marks are for your content, and that content is coming from your ability to retrieve information and rewrite in your own words. So for the love of God, don't sit there going, oh God, which side does my address go on? Just don't. Waste of time. Or sit there going, I've got to come up with a headline before I start. Leave the headline till last. Come up with it at the end. Just leave a space. Okay. As I've said, right, the majority of the marks come from you retrieving information from text C and rewriting it. Use it to guide your structure. Okay. Use it to figure out what's going on in each paragraph. Oh God, make sure you use your own words. Don't lift like sections from the text C and just plonk it in. You won't get marks for it. And you know how I mentioned that you might like quote a person, like in a news report, you might quote a person in a formal report. You might, yeah. So you're almost imagining a quote. So let's say, for example, in the text, Adam K, I'm using that one from 2020, said that being on the ward was mind-numbing. Okay, so if you interviewed Adam K, you're not going to write, it was mind-numbing, because you're lifting that from the text. Instead, you would say something like, it was so incredibly boring, I didn't know what to do with myself. Okay? So you're still putting it in your own words. Check your work, please. And check as you go, every paragraph. Write a paragraph, check it through. Yeah, because then you'll pick up on mistakes more easily and you'll be less likely to make the mistakes again. I promise it works. Tick off the information from your plan as you go to make sure that you're getting everything in, and then cross out the planning right at the end, okay? And then if you've got time, a final read through. Whoo, that's it from me. Did it in 20-ish minutes, but hopefully that's helped you just kind of feel a bit more confident, regardless what text type comes up, that you've got a few little tricks up your sleeve to show your examiner you know what you're doing. That is the aim of the game. If you're sitting the exam this week, because we're here in October 2023 doing this video, then massive good luck to you. Otherwise, happy revising.